Section 2, and I just want to help you understand how these courts are organized. And so the big idea here once more is that under our federal system there are three branches of government, and it is the responsibility of the judicial branch to interpret the laws, and in doing so they are serving an essential function in governing the nation. And so some terms you'll see today: district courts, jurisdiction, appeals. Again, we're getting into the organizational structure of the courts. And for you is when a president appoints a member of the United States Supreme Court or a federal or district judge, the Senate has to approve that candidate. And the question is, should the Senate have the right to confirm that candidate? Or should that right stay within the executive branch? And this is really relevant because, for example, in Obama's last year, Antonin Scalia, Justice of the United States Supreme Court, died in office. He refused to relinquish his position because he would not allow a Democratic president to pick his successor. He was very outspoken on that issue. So he died in office. Couldn't control that one. Well, President Obama picked a successor, Merrick Garland. The Senate ignored their constitutional duty and refused to give that individual a hearing. They refused for the entire year of 2016, and they said, we're going to make this an issue in the election. And so Trump won, and he picked his person, Neil Gorsuch, and Gorsuch now sits on the United States Supreme Court. And so this question is of immense importance because the Constitution does say that the Senate has to confirm. But in that case, there was a lot of weird legal, and it does get complicated. But let's keep it simple. Today we're going to talk about the types of federal courts. There are district courts, there are courts of appeals, and then of course the Supreme Court that you all know about. Now the lower federal courts, these get a lot less attention, but they're called district courts. These are where the original federal cases are heard. There are district courts in every state. For example, a federal judge in Hawaii said, no, President Trump, you may not issue the travel ban. True story. A federal judge in Hawaii had that authority over the president until it was heard by the Supreme Court. There are also appeals courts. These are courts that review decisions that are made in federal courts before they go to the Supreme Court. Now, what district courts look like? There are 94 of these, so there's at least one in every state. These are the cases that hear federal issues for the first time. Again, they're not hearing like Dakota allegedly stole a gallon of milk from Ingalls. No, that's a misdemeanor. It's going to be heard local court, etc. They're hearing that Chrissy's civil rights were violated, and there's a problem with the rule which caused her violation of civil rights. And so she challenges the rule, not just the local rule, but the national rule. That's where federal cases will hear it. For example, the travel ban. So the president said, you can't come here if you live from this country, this country, this country, this country. There's a problem with that. It's a problem with the rule, the national rule. And so the federal court in Hawaii said, no, you don't get to do that. They heard the case for the first time because they have original jurisdiction. And so they determined the facts of the case. So the president issued an executive order, said no from this country, this country, this country. They reviewed the facts of the case. They looked into the Constitution. They looked into federal law, and they said no. And then finally, there are witnesses on both sides. The president had representation here. Someone brought his case, and they had all of their reasons and evidence, etc., just like the video game that you played. And the federal court reached a verdict. Now, it was appealed. Yes, the president appealed that ruling. So, the appeals courts review decisions of district courts. Just like an appeals case, if you're tried for a serious crime, you have the right to appeal it, etc. These folks only hear the case if it is being appealed from a lower court. So the first group to hear the travel ban case was a federal court. But when it was appealed, again, they had appellate jurisdiction. There are only 12 of these in the entire country. So these are the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. So what? They can uphold a ruling, meaning they say, yeah, no travel ban. They can reverse it, say, sure, travel ban. Or they can also remand it, meaning we're going to send this back to Hawaii or Nebraska or wherever that heard it, and you guys need to hear it again. And in the appeals courts, the ruling is decided by a majority vote. Now, these rulings only concern protections of rights in a fair trial. That is, if the president's rights were violated and his case was not heard appropriately, then he has the right to challenge it, and that's what they claimed when they brought it to the appeals court. The court's ruling in a federal court, as well as a Supreme Court case, is called an opinion. If you're ever curious, I know some of you are very passionate on the abortion issue. If you're ever curious why the courts ruled the way they did, then what you do is you read the court's majority opinion. It's a very detailed explanation of the legal thinking behind a court's decision in a case. Because when a ruling is made and that opinion is written, there's also a minority opinion too. So if you look up Roe v. Wade, you can also hear the counter-argument in great detail by reading the minority opinion. Because that case established a precedent. And that means that ruling is now the basis for future judicial decisions. So the next question. Appeals courts are absolutely necessary because just like in criminal law, these big cases have the right to be reviewed by another party. So, federal judges, what do? It is their job to interpret the laws and ultimately protect the Constitution. And so these are the chief decision makers in the judicial branch. There are 650 district court judges. In every appeals court, now there's only 12 appeals courts in the entire country, but in every one there's going to be anywhere from 6 to 28 different judges hearing this case. Here's the big one. In the United States Supreme Court, there are only 9. 9 justices, period. They are not picked through an election. They don't care if you know their names. It's better if you don't, because they are above the political fray. At least they're supposed to be. And even though they're supposed to be above the political fray, there's only 9 of them. And their rulings have the power of law, and they can overrule presidents and legislatures. And so it's very important in who these people are. So, what they do, their job is detailed in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, where it states that federal judges are appointed by the president, and the Senate confirms them. There are no particular qualifications for federal judges. But if you're watching any of the confirmation hearings from the U.S. Senate, they are absolutely trying to ascertain this person's qualifications. The president doesn't just have the right to pick anybody, because the Constitution mandates that he have oversight. Now, there's also senatorial courtesy. That is, that the president submits the person's name to the senators for consideration. For example, I wasn't required to send the list of questions to Congressman Meadows. I did so as a courtesy. Also, so that he would have time to prepare answers for you guys, and hopefully would have better answers than just putting them on the spot. But again, we weren't required to send those questions. Just like a president is not required to send the list of names of judges that he is considering. But it's custom that he would offer that courtesy. When a judge has been appointed, that's a lifetime appointment. They don't have to run for re-election. They can be impeached, but just like impeaching a president, it's not a simple process. Most either die in office or choose to retire at some point. Again, most either die in office or choose to retire at some point. Now, there are magistrate judges as well. These are your local judges. They take care of the routine business. They issue court orders. They hear preliminary evidence. In fact, if you're going to argue any case, even if it's a federal one, it's probably going to go through the magistrates first. They'll hear any preliminary evidence, and of course they deal mostly with criminal cases. So if Dakota stole a gallon of milk, there's no federal law at question. He might give an impassioned plea about how he needs the gallon of milk, the Jean Valjean argument from Les Mis. You ever heard that? Jean Valjean stole a loaf of bread, and he was chased throughout his entire life, and his crime was an indictment not against him, but against the system. And so the French revolted and stormed the palaces and actually reformed the system. Whereas his crime was simply stole a loaf of bread. But the reason he stole it was to feed his family because the French government had failed. And so maybe his stealing a gallon of milk is an indictment against American society. And maybe he had a right to steal said loaf of bread. And he's going to argue that case before the judge. Society has failed me, ergo I had to steal milk. And the judge is going to rule on that. And maybe he has a case. Well, and again, they would decide. And if it's a national issue, they might move it to a federal court. But again, they hear minor cases. They're going to hear said gallon of milk case if he chooses to fight it, which it would be kind of crazy, but maybe he would fight it. Now, there are also U.S. attorneys. These are like the cops of the country. U.S. attorneys, fun fact, are some of the only people allowed to carry guns on planes. If you know the show Lost, it was a U.S. attorney who was escorting Kate when the plane crashed. His story arc ended somewhere in season 1, but anyway, that was his job, to escort prisoners awaiting federal cases. U.S. attorney represents the nation also in civil cases. And so a lot of the big cases you hear, United States versus. It's the U.S. attorney who is bringing that case before the court. These people serve 4-year terms. They're appointed by the president once more. They're confirmed by the Senate, and they report directly to the Attorney General of the United States, who oversees law enforcement at the federal level. And so officer gear, in a very complicated way, is under the umbrella of the United States Attorney General. Now, granted, he works for Henderson County, and so that's who he reports to directly. Henderson County reports indirectly to the state of North Carolina, who reports indirectly to the federal government. But the U.S. Marshals are the ones who actually make the arrests. There's a great movie about U.S. Marshals with Tommy Lee Jones, but they make the arrests, they collect the fines, they take the people to prison. In fact, I'd like to correct that. It wasn't the U.S. Attorney, it was the U.S. Marshal who's bringing Kate in. But they also protect jurors. So if you are selected for jury duty, yay, you have to hear a case. Well, guess what? whoever you're deciding against is probably going to be angry at you. They're going to hold a grudge. Small town juries, whew, no thanks. And guess what? You are entitled to protection. So just because I'm a jury member in Addie's case, and I rule Addie guilty, let's be honest, she's going to be mad at me. She may never forgive me for that. And, well, she might want to hurt me. And, yeah. And I'm entitled to protection from Addie because I have to decide on a matter relating to her freedom. And that might make me uncomfortable. I'm like, man, if I decide against Addie, she might want to hurt me. Will you protect me, U.S. Marshal? Yeah. And finally, they keep order because Addie might just jump over that table. But no, U.S. Marshals won't let her.
Realistically, though.
Okay, so U.S. Marshals are also the ones who serve legal papers. Let's say that Cheyenne witnessed the altercation on the bus, and it's now gone to trial, and we need Cheyenne's testimony. Cheyenne doesn't want to. Like, again, she's in this uncomfortable position. Do I want to test? Maybe she's friends with one of the people. I don't want to testify against a friend. She has the right to invoke the Fifth Amendment. She's still going to be subpoenaed. She can invoke the Fifth Amendment, but she can still be subpoenaed. They're going to put her on the bench. They're going to put her in front of the court. And they're going to ask her the questions. They have the right to ask her the questions and make her hear the questions. She has the right to remain silent, sure. But yes, it would be in a federal case. It would be a U.S. Marshal that would appear at her house or wherever, Huddle House, and say, Cheyenne, you have to appear in court. You've been served. So, should federal judges be removed from office if they make unpopular decisions? This is the whole reason we have a court system. They are above the political fray. They can be removed from office for misconduct, but they have the right to make decisions that are unpopular. For example, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg voted on the Roe v. Wade decision, it was obviously a very controversial one. But guess what? No one fired her for it. She had the right to vote her conscience.